If you're a fan of boxing and you want to get into mixed martial arts, but you get put off because UFC main events are on at 4 in the morning where you live, I may just have the solution for you. And the answer are three little letters that mean an awful lot to people in the know. And they are KSW. Welcome to The Fight with Tom White. Today, I'm looking at how British and Irish fight fans, who enjoy the UFC but can't really get into it because of the US-centric event times, can still get an MMA fix by looking somewhere they might not have considered before. KSW, or KSW in its original Polish, is the premier fight promotion in Poland, and it's one of the biggest and most respected in the world of mixed martial arts. Now, full disclosure, I'm British, in case you couldn't already tell. But I've been living in Poland since 2020, so I've had a kind of front row seat to how the scene works. And ever since moving here, my interest in MMA has gone up a bit each year. You can't escape it. It's part of the sports culture of the country, in the same way as boxing is woven into the sports culture of Britain and Ireland. MMA is massive here, particularly with young people, in a way that's never really quite happened, maybe with the exception of Conor McGregor back home in England for me. So for someone like me who loves boxing, it was an easy thing to get into, especially when it's so accessible and omnipresent. Because I was always casually interested in the UFC, particularly in the mid-2000s when it was still this kind of edgy, weird thing that not many people in Britain knew about. I had this DVD of the best knockouts, and it seemed at the time almost comically violent, like comically brutal. I didn't realise at the time that it's technically a lot safer than boxing because of the rules and the way it's refereed. But anyway, that's beside the point. So this is a bit of a casual recounting of history, but KSW, or KSW, was founded in the mid-2000s by Martin Lewandowski and Maciej Kowalski. Hope I got the pronunciations correct. Both of which are still involved in the sport, a bit like Dana White with the UFC, I guess. And in the beginning, it was a bit like Misfits boxing. There were quite a lot of freak fights. And the biggest star that really catapulted them into the mainstream was someone who a lot of British people will remember from when people my age were teenagers. And that's the Polish strongman, Mariusz Pudzianowski. If you remember, he was like the only World's Strongest Man competitor who actually looked jacked and not just fat, well fed. But today it's considered one of the most respected MMA federations in the world, and one of their biggest stars, Saladin Parnasse from France, he fought on the MMA Netflix show last month, the one Jake Paul promoted with Ronda Rousey headlining. And by all accounts, certainly my own opinion, he was the standout performer. So that's the level that the KSW fighters are at. Like, the elite guys and girls are elite. And now that his KSW contract is up, there are rumours, pretty strong ones, that he's going to sign a pretty big contract with the UFC. So watch this space. The thing is, previously, he turned them down twice to stay with KSW because the pay was better than what the UFC were offering at that time. And this is a good thing. It gives talented fighters like him another route to success and a way to build their profiles outside of the much criticised entry-level UFC pay structure. And later on, when they've established themselves in the sport, they can make the switch if they want, with much more leverage. If I was an MMA fighter, that's definitely the route that I would take, especially seeing firsthand how big KSW actually is over here. And that brings me to the production side of things. Because if you're a big boxing fan, you're probably used to the big Matchroom and Queensberry cards with everyone singing Sweet Caroline and sometimes fireworks and all that kind of stuff. The weekend's White House card aside, the UFC doesn't really do that kind of pageantry. I mean, nobody does it quite like Brits do, right? The UFC tends to put stuff on at the Apex in Vegas, which is a bit sterile, or they put it on in standard American arenas where the crowd doesn't have that frenetic energy that the UK boxing fans are used to. I mean, think of Dave Allen, a great guy, but a fighter that's not really anywhere near world level. He gets audiences and energy from the crowd and everything that most UFC cards, or US boxing shows to be fair, could only dream of. But KSW, it's a different kettle of fish. They put on absolute spectacles. There's not a Wembley Stadium over here, but there is the PG Narodowy in Warsaw. It's massive. And KSW have filled it twice. Maxing out at about 50 to 60,000 fans each time, which is not bad for a so-called small regional promotion, right? They do the massive walkouts, the live orchestra, the pyrotechnics, the kind of gladiatorial theme. Both of those stadium shows were called Colosseum, like Colosseum 1, Colosseum 2, if I recall correctly. So there's a big hint there of what it was like. Basically, if you appreciate the theatre of a big British fight night, KSW's event production is probably the closest thing to it in the MMA world. Not every card, obviously, but not every Matchroom or Queensberry show is a spectacle either. It's not really possible to do that month in, month out. Something else to mention, a bit of an elephant in the room. One of the biggest hurdles, I think, for boxing fans trying to get into MMA is the wrestling. Now, on a personal level, I've recently started jiu-jitsu, and I'm fascinated by the grappling side of the sport. But if you're a boxing purist who just wants to see two guys trade leather, watching someone get held down against the cage or on the mat for 15 minutes is boring. Now, obviously, KSW is MMA, so there's grappling, jiu-jitsu and everything like that. But historically, the European MMA scene, and maybe Poland in particular, has a massive kickboxing and Muay Thai base. So much so that it's actually very hard here to find a pure boxing gym. I mean, trust me, I've tried. And MMA academies are everywhere, but traditional boxing gyms are a bit trickier to find. So a lot of the guys and girls on the KSW roster are strikers. They come to put on a show and they look for the knockout. It's a style of MMA, I think, that translates really well if you're coming over from a pure boxing background. But it's mixed martial arts, right? So if you're into grappling, there's more than enough to keep you entertained. It's not just kickboxing. But this brings us back to the biggest selling point for the UK and Irish audience, and that is the time zone. Combat sports in those two countries are still built around a traditional Saturday night pub culture. Either you go to the pub or you get your mates round, get some beers in, a pizza, and the main event ring walks start around 10 or 10:30 p.m, right? But trying to do that with the UFC is a nightmare, because the main card doesn't even start until 3 in the morning. By the time the main event happens, it's 5:30 a.m, half your mates are asleep on the sofa, the sun's coming through the cracks in the curtains. It's like a bad night out in your 20s. It takes out your entire Sunday. But because KSW is based in Poland, it's just 1 hour ahead of the UK, so the events happen at more of a prime time. You can watch an elite world-class MMA card on a Saturday evening, see the main event at 9:30, 10 p.m, and be in bed by midnight. In fact, if you're used to British boxing, it's arguably a slightly better schedule. So, if you want to give it a go, it's actually incredibly easy to watch. All you need is a Fire Stick. Just kidding. No, you don't need another streaming subscription where you pay every month for something you only actually watch 5 or 6 times a year. DAZN. You can actually just buy the event directly through kswtv.com for about 10 quid. By the way, I don't get a cut of this, although thinking about it, I probably should. And it's in English. You aren't just watching a feed with the Polish commentary like dubbed over. It's a fully localized broadcast for the international audience with, proper expert English commentators. In fact, next weekend is the perfect time to test this out because it's KSW 119. It's a pretty stacked card featuring guys like Patrick Kaczmarczyk, featherweight champion, featherweight in MMA being quite a bit heavier than in boxing. And I reckon it will deliver exactly the kind of high-paced European action that I've been speaking about. It might just be the perfect intro. So get some mates around and see for yourself. Let me know in the comments if you've ever watched a KSW event, or if the 4 a.m. UFC start times have actually been putting you off getting into MMA. As always, hit subscribe for more coverage on the European fight scene, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Cheers.